How a wounded soldier fought for 3 days alone until the counterattack. This title encapsulates not a myth, but a documented feat of endurance that unfolded in one of the most brutal and overlooked campaigns of the Second World War. In the sweltering, disease-ridden jungles of northern Burma, in the late spring of 1944, a single British rifleman was left behind, bleeding and isolated, as his battalion was forced into a desperate withdrawal. For 72 excruciating hours, he would cling to life in a shallow, muddy scrape, armed with little more than his rifle, a few grenades, and an unbreakable will. He would face not only the agony of his wounds and the torment of the jungle, but the constant, creeping threat of the Imperial Japanese Army soldiers scouring the area for stragglers. His solitary vigil, a masterpiece of concealment and defiance, would culminate in a pivotal role in one of the most critical counterattacks of the entire Burma campaign. This is the story of Private John Jack Thornton of the 2nd Battalion, the Duke of Wellington's regiment, and his lonely war on the infamous Tidham Road. To comprehend the sheer desperation of Jack Thornton's predicament, we must first set the stage of the wider conflict. By May 1944, the British 14th Army, under the brilliant but austere leadership of General William Slim, was locked in a grueling battle of attrition against the Japanese 15th Army along the mountainous frontier between India and Burma. The objective for the Allies was to defend the crucial supply routes into the besieged town of Impal and to eventually punch through to the plains of central Burma. One of these vital arteries was the Tidham Road, a winding, treacherous track carved through nearly impenetrable jungle and over steep, razor-backed ridges. Holding this road was the 17th Indian Infantry Division. Within this division fought the men of the 2nd Battalion, the Duke of Wellington's regiment, the Dukes, a tough, veteran unit from the West, riding of Yorkshire. Private Jack Thornton, a 24-year-old former miner from Barnsley, was a typical Duke. He was a solid, uncomplaining soldier, respected for his physical toughness and his uncanny ability to remain calm under pressure. He was armed with a standard Lee Enfield No. 4 rifle, and like all infantrymen in this theater, he carried the ever-present fear of malaria, dysentery, and the tenacious, often fanatical Japanese enemy. The immediate strategic situation in late May was one of extreme fluidity and danger. The Japanese had launched a major offensive, Yugo, aiming to cut the Impal Road and destroy the Allied forces. The Dukes, along with the rest of their brigade, were ordered to hold a series of hilltop positions codenamed Pimples along the Tidham Road to delay the Japanese advance and allow the main body of the division to consolidate. The battalion dug in on a scrub-covered hill known as Point 1421. The jungle was so thick that fields of fire had to be hacked out by hand with kukris and machetes. The air was thick with humidity, mosquitoes, and the constant, eerie chorus of jungle insects. The men were exhausted, under strength, and living on reduced rations. They knew the Japanese 33rd Division was closing in, a force renowned for its ability to infiltrate and attack from all sides. On the afternoon of May 28th, the storm broke. A heavy Japanese mortar and artillery barrage slammed into Point 1421, shredding the canopy and churning the red earth. This was followed by a series of fierce, bonsai-style infantry assaults from multiple directions. The Dukes held, repelling attack after attack throughout the night, but the pressure was relentless. By dawn on the 29th, with casualties mounting and ammunition running low, Battalion HQ received the grim order: withdraw to a new defensive line 2 miles to the rear. The disengagement would be a nightmare, conducted under constant enemy pressure. It was during this chaotic, fighting retreat that Private Jack Thornton's war took its catastrophic turn. The withdrawal from Point 1421 began at 0600 hours on May 29th. It was a textbook example of a rearguard action under hellish conditions. Companies peeled back by platoons, covering each other's movement with disciplined bursts of Bren gun and rifle fire. The Japanese, sensing a weakening line, pressed harder, their infiltrators trying to cut the narrow jungle tracks behind the British positions. Thornton was in B Company, tasked with being among the last to leave. As his platoon began to move back through a narrow defile, a Japan, the initial burst stitched across the trail. Thornton felt a searing impact in his left thigh, as if he'd been struck by a red-hot poker, and another, glancing blow against his helmet that knocked him senseless. He collapsed into the ferns beside the path. Through a haze of pain and concussion, he saw his platoon sergeant, a man named MacLeod, crouch beside him. MacLeod's face was grim. He quickly applied a field dressing to Thornton's leg, which was bleeding profusely. "Hang on, Jack. We'll get you out," MacLeod yelled over the din of battle. But at that moment, a concentrated mortar barrage began to walk up the defile, forcing the withdrawing platoon to take cover and then move rapidly or be cut off. In the chaos of explosions, dirt, and screaming metal, the order to move was given. A desperate MacLeod, with Japanese infantry now visible closing in through the trees, was faced with an impossible choice: stay and try to carry Thornton, likely resulting in both their deaths and the loss of the rest of the section, or order the withdrawal to continue. With a look of profound anguish, MacLeod was pulled away by a corporal. "We'll be back for you, Thornton. Keep your head down," he shouted, a promise that was swallowed by the jungle and the roar of battle. And just like that, Thornton was alone. For what seemed like an eternity, he lay still, listening. The sounds of his battalion's fighting retreat faded westward, replaced by the chattering, guttural shouts of Japanese soldiers moving through the area, searching for wounded and stragglers. The pain in his leg was a throbbing, white-hot agony. He knew he couldn't move far. Using his elbows and his good leg, he dragged himself off the path, down a slight, muddy slope, and into a natural hollow formed by the roots of a giant ficus tree. It was not a foxhole, barely a scrape, but it offered some concealment. He checked his equipment. He had his Lee Enfield with approximately 40 rounds of 303 ammunition, two number 36 mils bomb grenades, his water bottle, half full, a small, sodden packet of hardtack biscuits, and his bayonet. His leg was the immediate crisis. The field dressing was already soaked through with blood. He knew from the sickening, deep ache and the sheer volume of blood that the bullet had likely shattered his femur. Without proper medical attention, he was looking at gangrene, amputation, or bleeding out. Using his webbing straps and a strip torn from his shirt, he fashioned a crude tourniquet high on his thigh and tightened it with the barrel of his rifle. The pain was blinding, but the bleeding slowed to a seep. The first day, May 29th, passed in a haze of pain, fear, and stifling heat. He drifted in and out of consciousness, each time waking with a jolt, expecting to see a Japanese soldier standing over him. The jungle was alive with sound, but every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent his heart racing. He rationed his water to a few precious sips. He dared not eat the hardtack, knowing it would demand more water he did not have. His world shrank to the confines of his muddy hollow, the canopy of green above, and the ever-present, gnawing pain. Dawn on May 30th brought the monsoon rains. A torrential, warm downpour drummed on the leaves and turned the ground into a slick paste. For Thornton, it was both a curse and a blessing. The rain cooled his feverish skin and provided water. He lay with his mouth open, catching what he could, and refilled his bottle from a rivulet forming near his hide. But the rain also brought new miseries. His uniform was soaked through, his wound began to throb with a new, ominous intensity, and the humidity was suffocating. The rain, however, also masked sound. It was during a particularly heavy downpour that he heard them. A Japanese patrol, perhaps 5 or 6 men, was moving slowly through the undergrowth less than 20 yards from his position. He could hear their low, conversational tones, the clink of equipment. He froze, pressing himself into the mud and roots, his hand gripping the cold metal of his rifle. One soldier paused, seemingly looking directly towards his hiding place. Thornton held his breath, his fingers inches from a grenade. The soldier urinated against a tree, then moved on, disappearing into the gray curtain of rain. The near discovery was a terrifying shock to his system, but it also ignited a fierce, stubborn spark. He was not dead yet. He was a duke, and he would not be taken easily. He spent the remainder of the day meticulously improving his hide, using fallen leaves and branches to better camouflage his position. He also made a crucial decision. He would not wait passively for rescue or death. He would act as a listening post. If he could gather information on Japanese movements and strength and survive long enough to report it, his ordeal might have some purpose beyond mere survival. He began to listen with a trained ear, noting the direction of patrols, estimating numbers from the sounds of their passage, and even marking the times he heard vehicle engines, likely light tanks or trucks, on the distant Tidham Road. He was becoming the eyes and ears for a battalion he hoped was still out there. The second night, May 30th, 31 ST, was the worst. The pain was a constant, screaming companion. Fever set in, bringing with it vivid, terrifying hallucinations. He saw his mother hanging washing in the Yorkshire drizzle. He heard his sergeant's voice calling his name. He jerked awake multiple times, convinced Japanese soldiers were crawling towards him. At one point in the pitch black, he heard the distinct, heavy scuffling of an animal, a bear or a large wild boar, snuffling near his hide. He lay perfectly still, sweat mingling with the rain on his face, until it moved away. The psychological toll was immense. The isolation was absolute. The temptation to simply fire his rifle into the air, to bring a quick, decisive end to the suffering, was a siren song in his mind. But he thought of his mates in B Company. He thought of the promise, however faint, of "we'll be back for you." He thought of the shame of giving up. He held on. As the gray light of May 31st filtered through the dripping jungle, he was a ghost of a soldier, filthy, feverish, dehydrated, and weakening by the hour. But he was alive, and he was alert, and he now possessed valuable information. The Japanese seemed to be consolidating in this area, using the trails near his position as a main route. He had heard the sounds of digging, entrenching tools unearthed, suggesting they were fortifying positions not far to the east. This was no longer just a survival ordeal. It was a reconnaissance mission. The morning of May 31st presented a new and terrifying development. The Japanese activity around his position increased dramatically. Instead of passing patrols, he heard the sounds of a sizable force digging in, establishing what sounded like a company strongpoint or a command post barely 100 yards to the southeast of his hide. He could hear officers barking orders, the thud of mortars being emplaced, the constant traffic of soldiers. His shallow scrape, which had been a hiding place, was now on the forward edge of what appeared to be an active Japanese position. He was, effectively, behind enemy lines but also in their backyard. Any movement now would be instantly detected. Any sound, a cough, the rustle of a blanket, could give him away. His margin for error had vanished. The crisis was no longer just about pain or thirst. It was about imminent discovery and certain execution. Japanese soldiers were known for their brutal treatment of captured enemies, especially those found hiding. His fate, if found, would be torture and a bayonet. To make matters worse, his physical condition was deteriorating rapidly. The fever was burning through him, sapping the last of his strength. The wound on his leg, despite the tourniquet, was clearly infected. A sickly, sweet odor began to emanate from it. He was lightheaded, and his vision swam if he moved his head too quickly. His water was gone again, and the monsoon rains had temporarily ceased, leaving the jungle steaming and oppressive. He knew he could not last another day in this state. The battalion had not returned. The promise of rescue felt like a cruel joke. The logical conclusion was inescapable. He had been written off. He was a casualty of war, left to die in the mud. Despair, a cold, heavy weight, settled in his chest. He looked at his 2 grenades. One for the enemy if they came, he thought, and one for himself. It was a clean soldier's way out. He would not be taken alive. He laid the grenades carefully in front of him, their painted segments dull in the green light. He made his peace. He thought of home, of the pub he frequented with his father, of the girl he'd left behind. He prepared to die. But as he lay there, waiting for the end, a new sound reached his ears. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the jungle hum. Then it grew clearer, the distant, deep-throated rumble of tank engines, and the sharper, more rapid reports of artillery fire. Not Japanese artillery, the familiar crump of British 25-pounders. The sound was coming from the west, from the direction his battalion had retreated. A surge of adrenaline, pure and electric, shot through his exhausted body. The artillery fire was not random. It was a preparatory barrage. He knew the sound intimately. It was the overture to an attack. His battalion, or another allied unit, was counterattacking. The promise had not been empty. They were coming back. Hope, agonizing and fierce, flared within him. But with it came a new, terrifying responsibility. He was now sitting directly between the launching point of a British counterattack and a newly established Japanese strongpoint. If the attack came straight down the trail, they would walk into a prepared killing zone. They would be massacred, and he would be killed in the crossfire or overrun. His solitary vigil was over. He was no longer just a survivor or a listener. He was now a crucial piece on the battlefield. He had to warn them. He had to signal his position and the enemy's. But how? A flare pistol? He had none. A signal mirror? Lost. Firing his rifle would only draw immediate Japanese fire upon himself and give away the attack's direction prematurely. He had his 2 grenades and his rifle. He needed to create a diversion to disrupt the Japanese position at the critical moment, to draw their attention away from the main attack axis. It was a suicide mission. But if it gave his mates a fighting chance, it was a trade he was willing to make. The crisis of despair had transformed into a crisis of purpose. He would not die hiding. He would die fighting. Thornton's mind, previously fogged with pain and fever, sharpened with a crystalline, desperate clarity. He formulated a plan with the cool precision of a seasoned veteran. The British barrage intensified, walking closer to his position. The Japanese in the strongpoint were now alert, shouting orders, their weapons rattling as they manned their firing positions, facing west, anticipating the attack from that direction. Thornton, lying to their north and slightly behind them, was in their blind spot. He waited, each second an eternity, listening to the symphony of war build around him. He needed the perfect moment, when the British infantry were close enough to exploit the chaos he would create, but before the main firefight was joined. He checked his rifle, ensuring a round was chambered. He loosened the pins on both grenades, holding one in his left hand, the other placed carefully beside him. The smell of cordite from the barrage began to drift through the jungle, mixing with the scent of damp earth and his own infection. His heart hammered against his ribs, a painful, rhythmic drumbeat that seemed louder than the approaching guns. Then he saw them. Through a gap in the foliage, he spotted the first khaki-clad figures advancing in a tactical crouch, maybe 150 yards to the west. It was a British platoon, moving with grim purpose, bayonets fixed. They were heading directly for the Japanese strongpoint, unaware of its full strength or precise location. This was it, the moment of decision. Every instinct screamed to stay hidden, to let the battle flow over him. But he thought of MacLeod's anguished face, of the promise to come back. They had come back. Now it was his turn. With a strength he did not know he still possessed, he pushed himself up onto his elbows, ignoring the searing protest from his leg. He took the first grenade in his right hand, pulled the pin, and with a grunt of effort, lobbed it in a high arc towards the heart of the Japanese position where he had heard the mortar cruise. He did not wait to see it land. He immediately grabbed the second grenade, pulled its pin, and threw it towards a Japanese machine gun nest he had pinpointed by sound. Then, he snatched up his Lee Enfield, rolled onto his side to present the smallest target, and began to fire. Not wild, panicked shots, but deliberate, aimed fire at any movement or flash of khaki he could see in the Japanese trenches. Crack. Work the bolt. Crack. Work the bolt. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the Japanese. The first grenade exploded with a satisfying crump amidst a group of soldiers manning 2 mortars. The second detonated near the machine gun, silencing it momentarily. Thornton's rifle shots, coming from an entirely unexpected direction, their rear and flank, sowed utter confusion. Japanese soldiers spun around, trying to locate this new threat, taking their attention and fire away from the main British advance. For a few precious seconds, the strongpoint's defense was paralyzed by disarray. That was all the advancing British platoon needed. Seeing the enemy position erupt in chaos from within, their commander, a young lieutenant, seized the moment. He stood up, whistle screaming, and shouted the order to charge. A wave of bayonets and screaming men crashed into the Japanese position from the west just as its defenders were turned towards Thornton's furious one-man assault from the north. Thornton kept firing until his bolt clicked on an empty chamber. He had no more ammunition. He lay back in his scrape, utterly spent, listening to the brutal, close-quarter combat now raging just yards away. He heard the screams, the shouts of "Bonsai," met by guttural Yorkshire oaths, the crunch of entrenching tools, and the wet thud of bayonets finding their mark. He had done it. He had turned the tide. He closed his eyes, expecting at any moment a Japanese soldier to stumble upon him and finish him off. But the sounds of fighting began to recede eastward as the British platoon cleared the position and pushed the surviving Japanese back. And then, a miracle. A voice he recognized. "Over here. I found him. It's Thornton." It was Corporal Evans from his own section, his face blackened with cordite and mud, peering over the lip of the hollow. Evans' expression shifted from battle focus to shock to overwhelming relief. "Bloody hell, Jack. You're alive." Within minutes, a medical orderly was there, cutting away the foul bandages, administering morphine, and preparing a makeshift stretcher. As they lifted him, Thornton, through the haze of painkillers and exhaustion, managed to croak out to the lieutenant. "Sir Mortar's dug in." He sighed. "Command post. 100 yards that way." He had delivered his reconnaissance report. His 3-day ordeal was over. He had fought alone until the counterattack. Private John Thornton was evacuated to a field hospital and underwent multiple surgeries to save his leg and combat the severe infection. He survived, though he would walk with a pronounced limp for the rest of his life. His actions on Point 1421 did not go unrecognized. The lieutenant who led the assault and the survivors of his platoon gave sworn statements describing how a lone soldier, later identified as Thornton, had single-handedly disrupted a key Japanese strongpoint from the rear, allowing their attack to succeed with minimal casualties. They had assumed it was a dedicated reconnaissance patrol that had been cut off, not one wounded man who had been lying in the mud for 3 days. For his conspicuous gallantry, exceptional fortitude, and outstanding initiative while wounded and cut off behind enemy lines, Private John Thornton was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, the second highest award for bravery for British and Commonwealth other ranks. The citation specifically noted his deliberate decision to engage the enemy from his concealed position at the critical moment of the counterattack, an action which directly contributed to the success of the operation and the saving of numerous Allied lives. He returned to Yorkshire in late 1945 a hero, though a reluctant one, who seldom spoke of his time in the jungle. The broader counterattack on the Tidham Road continued, and the Japanese offensive was eventually halted and then shattered at Impal and Kohima, a turning point in the Burma campaign often called Britain's greatest battle. Thornton's small, personal saga is a microcosm of that larger struggle, one of isolation, resilience, and a stubborn refusal to yield. His story demonstrates that the individual soldier, even when broken and abandoned, can exert a profound influence on the battlefield. He was not a general planning a grand strategy, but a private with a rifle who, at the decisive second, chose to act. His 3-day ordeal forged more than a hero. It forged a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure beyond all reasonable limits and to fight on, not just for survival, but for the men beside him, even when they were out of sight. He held the line alone until the line could once again advance. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to War Legend Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.